When I went to medical school, there was not a single state that had an obesity rate over 20%. Now there isn't a state that has an obesity rate under 20%, and most have 40%.
I've been really on this kick, on this health kick, not for myself. I just kind of live in a reasonably healthy state the vast majority of the time. But I'm seeing more, just been more and more like, as I've drifted away from focusing on things that we can't change and generally just bitter and annoyed at the political state of our reality, I've found there's a void in me that needs to care about something, something big. And for me right now, that's health. It just is just a problem, and it's been an issue. The way it was treated through COVID, I felt was disgusting, and wanted to do something about it. I don't know, talk about it. I feel like that's one thing that we have a little bit more or a lot more control over, but where propaganda is lied to, the companies that are responsible for our quote unquote health are incentivized for us to be sick. So we have this really broken system, and we live in a sea of broken systems stacked on top of other broken systems. And that's kind of our current world. So, or at least this country. Yeah. I wanted to start off with this clip from Tucker Carlson today. Now, you guys know that Tucker and I have some disagreements, of course, but he brings on people that I like. And for that, I appreciate him. Whether it be Glenn Greenwald, Matt Taibbi, Dr. Mark Hyman, like we have here. But Dr. Mark Hyman and Tucker are going to get into our national health emergency. If you don't know who Dr. Mark Hyman is, I highly recommend checking him out. He's got some great books out there and just overall articulates these concepts and the struggles that people have in a really productive way, I find. So let's just dive right in here. I'll stop it throughout and give my conjecture. And here we go.
I think most people are really afraid of cancer.
Yeah.
If you could kind of sum up the fears of your average middle-aged person, it would be one word: cancer.
Cancer, yeah.
What do you do to lessen your risk?
That's a great question. Well, cancer, primarily is caused by food and environmental toxins. So food, what kind of food? Sugar. We know clearly that pancreatic cancer, colon cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, many of the common cancers, pancreatic cancer, are caused by something called insulin resistance, which is basically...
Pancreatic cancer?
Yeah. Which is pre-diabetes or poor metabolic health. And here's the kicker, Tucker. 93.2% of Americans are in poor metabolic health, meaning they have some form of pre-diabetes or insulin resistance. They have high blood sugar, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, they're overweight, or they've had a heart attack or stroke. That means 6.8% of us are not sick at some level. And that poor metabolic health is driving all these conditions, whether it's cancer, heart disease, diabetes, dementia, depression, infertility, so many different things, even acne. Which is
really?
Yes. So this is our food system is the biggest killer on the planet.
I have too many questions for you,
okay.
But I just want to take out one point that you made and ask you to go a little deeper. Depression.
Yes.
There's a connection between sugar and depression.
Absolutely. At Harvard and Stanford now, there are psychiatric departments that study this. Metabolic psychiatry is at Stanford, and they're studying the effect of insulin resistance and prediabetes and poor metabolism that comes from eating sugar and starch, flour, and how that affects our brain. At Harvard, there's a department of nutritional psychiatry that studies similar things, as well as the gut microbiome. There's a doctor at Harvard, Christopher Palmer, wrote a book called Brain Energy, talking about how he's cured schizophrenia and other mental disorders by putting people on a very low sugar or starch diet. So absolutely, the data is there. There's no question. There's actually a big trial that was done in Australia, I think, and they used something called, what was the study called? The SMILE trial. SMILE trial, studying depression, right? They come up with these names. So basically using dietary interventions to treat depression. And they found that it worked better than drugs. And it is basically getting rid of the junk food and eating real food.
Let's look at this really quick and just jump in here. The first line of defense for so many things in our country, but including our health, is drugs, right? Ozempic is about to be deemed essential. I'm talking about that in the public episode and getting into some other stuff deeper on this issue. But when you look at this, it's like drugs, right? And we have to understand that human beings operate from incentives, and we also have a high level of cognitive bias. Cognitive bias is part of human nature. We have to accept that about ourselves. We do not have the capacity for pure objectivity. We will operate from our own self-interest. And the way that centralized power and centralized authority is incentivized is for profit driving. That's what they do. That's what they need. It's self-preservation on their own end of themselves, their organizations that they work for. So we need to understand the fact that based on the principles of human nature and operating towards incentives, things like low-cost, low-quality foods that make us sick and kill us, right, are highly profitable and highly addictive. So therefore, feeding people and encouraging the ingestion of those foods, right, and encouraging sickness is in alignment with the incentives. You don't need a conspiracy when You don't need a conspiracy when interests align, right? So when we think about that, and that's profitable on one end, right? We are subsidizing poverty foods in this country, right? So from the government on down, and then we're also subsidizing the creation of these drugs, right? So there's profits on both ends. It's not that complicated. It's not a stretch. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's just humans doing what humans do.
And they found that I want to call it the GLAD diet as opposed to American diet, which is called the SAD diet, the standard American diet.
Yeah. Well, it certainly is a SAD diet. I mean, again, too many questions, but when I
wrote a book about this, by the way, it's called The Ultra Mind Solution: How to Fix Your Broken Brain by Fixing Your Body First. And a lot of the mood disorders, the depression, the suicidality, the violence we see, often the sort of polarization of our society, I believe in part is related to our diet. There was a study I quote in my book, Food Fix, which is about our food system and how to fix it, where they looked at juvenile detention centers, and they found that there was a 97% reduction in violence in the juvenile detention centers when they gave them healthy food. There was a 75% reduction in restraints and a 100% reduction in suicides, which is the third leading cause of death in these teenage boy populations, just by giving them healthy food.
And by healthy food, it sounds like you mean big picture reducing the amount of sugar.
Yeah, I mean, eating real food, stuff that your great-grandmother knew was food, right? If your great-grandmother, wouldn't know what a Pop-Tart is, right?
Right.
But she knows whatever.
So let's expand on this a little bit. So one other thing we have as a cultural staple is treating the body in separate parts, right? So we treat the brain different than the body, the gut different from the this or that. It's like, the word holistic gets overused, to be sure, but a holistic approach, knowing that all of these things are attached, even our emotional state, our mental state, our gut biome, all of these things are connected, and you can solve a lot of problems by moving your body and eating real food. Like I was in the King Soopers the other day, and for some reason people in Colorado like the King Soopers, and there's a really nice King Soopers just down the road from our house. I was in there, and it's huge. I mean, it's a huge store. And I don't usually like to shop at stores like that. I like to go to stores that are small, whether it's a Sprouts or a Whole Foods, something that's small. I don't want to spend a lot of time in there. I don't want to walk 6 miles. I mean, I like walking, but I don't like walking in a grocery store necessarily. And there's a lot of stuff in there. There's a lot of products, but there's just not a lot of food. I mean, the funny thing is, like, and not to, Whole Foods is Whole Foods. They overuse single-use plastic, and some things they annoy me in their other way. They use canola oil in their hot food bar, stuff like that. But in this grocery store that was probably like 40,000 square feet, the produce section was smaller than the Whole Foods that's probably a quarter of the size, if not smaller, right? Or the Sprouts even. A little bitty Sprouts, which is a pretty basic grocery store, or a Sprouts or a Natural Grocers. Their produce section was more robust and bigger in these tiny grocery stores than it was in a King Soopers. It was their produce section, their real food options were so limited in a massive, massive warehouse size grocery store. There were products, but there was very little food. I would say it was probably 5% of what the things they had in there could be considered food by my standards. So I don't go back there. I don't like it. It's frustrating for me because to find the things that I need is such a burden. It's such a burden just to find quality food in modern grocery stores. And is that not a great representation of our culture in our country? Right? Just think about it. Think about it's like the Pareto principle, right? 80-20. It's like 80% of the things we produce are trash. Now, people that are staunch capitalists will call that innovation, but I don't. I call that waste. Our food is poison. It's the system is so from the bottom up and the top down, right? From the meat packers exploiting the farmers and ranchers, incentivizing low quality meats, right? The amount of hormones and the lifestyle some of our cattle have to go through. Now, there's a lot of propaganda there too, because most cattle are raised on grass for a time, but still, what about the pesticides they're eating, right? Again, the hormones and things like that. Are they living a life that is creating a positive environment for our food? And do we even consider or have a conversation about the environment that our food is grown in, right? And now we get distracted by things like plastic straws and climate change and whatever. And I think those are, from the top down, distraction issues to keep you from focusing on things that you can actually change. That's my kind of view on things. But when we look at it, it's like, well, these are conversations we could have. And when we think about the way that COVID was handled, what if someone, right, like Dr. Mark Hyman was at those press briefings discussing things like this for the 2 years or 3 years, actually, that we had to deal with the free at the level we had to deal with it at? I mean, how much lifestyle change can take place in 3 years with pragmatic, honest information, right? And then you can make the personal responsibility argument. But when it's a tremendous burden to even find accurate and honest information because they've flooded the zone, these corporations have flooded the zone with poor information, can you really call it a personal responsibility issue? You know, I mean, there is responsibility to, like, are you doing completely nonsensical things? But have you been indoctrinated into an addiction process with low quality foods that have gotten your mind, gut, and general state of being habituated to poisoning yourself, right? Leading to depression, suicide. We want to have all these conversations about these issues, but we don't ever want to talk about the root causes and how we can do pragmatic, common sense things to create a better environment for our life and the life of our food. Let's continue.
Carrot is, or a chicken, or an egg, or rice, or whatever. Like, it's food that you would recognize where it came from the field to the fork. There weren't a million steps that deconstructed the ingredients, reassembled them into what we call ultra-processed food, which is unrecognizable from its original form. And if for every 10% of your calories is ultra-processed food, your risk of death goes up by 14%. And our diet is 60% ultra-processed food, and kids is 67%.
As a new dad, this means a lot, right? So I had a conversation with Kelly, my wife, when Ro was just born, and I was like, I'm really grateful that we're just kind of like what I consider like a meat and potatoes house, right? Like, I'm not a low carb guy, but it's moderate. I eat meat, some vegetables, some fruit, potatoes, rice. I really like root vegetables and tubers, carrots, stuff like that. A lot of it's wild game as much as I can. We've realized that we're going to have to kill like 3 elk and a couple of deer to get through the whole year, which should be doable, which I'm pretty excited about, setting that as a new goal. So I thought that our elk was going to last a lot longer than it did. Turns out we eat a lot of meat, and that's what we leaned on, and it went pretty quick. But when you think about that, like, think about what kids eat, right? Cheerios, Cheez-Its, Goldfish. Like, that's not real food, guys. That's not real food. And people are like, well, they're just kids. They're just kids. Like, I had to have a conversation with my family about Easter, right? Like, what? I shared this meme the other day. It was like, what holidays in this country aren't based around low quality foods, right? Birthdays, Easter, Christmas, even. I mean, Christmas, you can get away with some good stuff because you can do like really rich foods, like, and you can treat yourself a little bit there. But like, my family had like more desserts than anything else. It was kind of gross to me, honestly, after a while. And keep going on and on. Valentine's Day, it's built around food that will kill you. And you find these excuses. We've engineered excuses for things like, oh, well, they're just kids. They're just kids. They can handle it. They're just kids. High sugar foods are fine. It's just kids, right? That little brain worm has gotten into a lot of people. And you think about 67% of a kid's diet. And that's one thing too that leads to teeth issues, right? Like, children, when they get their teeth, they're supposed to chew on things. Chewing creates healthier teeth. Breathing through your nose creates better teeth, oddly enough, and better jaw structure. So we have, if you look at people that are indigenous populations where they eat real food, they have piano teeth. They have teeth. They have piano key teeth. That's kind of hard to say, but like really straight, robust teeth, right? If you look at archaeological digs, they could do dental work, which was pretty fascinating if they broke teeth and stuff like that, but they didn't really have braces, right? they had straight teeth for the most part. Now, when you move into Europe, you start eating soft foods. Kids aren't really chewing as much. You're feeding them, peas and whatever, like smashed stuff that's like blended up and processed in that way, even if it is real food. One, I would suggest making that yourself if you're going to, and leaving it a little grittier, leaving the fiber in there so kids have something to chew on. And it has to be tapered in, but kids are supposed to chew. And when you're eating, everything is mashed. It does not create an environment for your skeletal development in your face, in your skull, to develop in the way it's supposed to. The musculature around your jaw. Like, look at how many muscles are in your face. Those things are supposed to be used, right? Like, I'm proud of the fact that I never had braces. I've never had braces in my life. My grandmother also, when I was eating baby food formula, or baby food, like the smushed baby food, what she would do was take a little bit of chicken fried steak, a little bit of gravy, a little mashed potatoes, and put it in a blender with some heavy cream. I think that is why I am a large man. But it's like that was hearty, real food. And people are like, oh, that's so gross. And I'm like, you were eating smashed peas, dude. So think about that. Like, I'm not saying like give your kid something they can choke on, like give them time, you get it's tapering in, but like we don't think about these things. Like goldfish aren't really doing anything positive for your kid. And if you don't introduce these things and you start early, you're conditioning a child to eat real food. And that's going to have long-lasting effects, but we've created this excuse of simplicity and convenience and, oh, they're just kids. And you're creating an environment that's just perpetuating the cycle.
It's a national emergency, honestly. I mean, there's 6 million people that die from COVID globally, but 11 million people die every year from bad food.
And those who don't die have reduced joy in their lives and more confusion in that.
Right. There's something called quality of life years that doctors use to analyze the effect of things. 255 million years lost in terms of quality of life.
But I mean, the numbers that you just gave point to the deeper problem, which is it's not easy to quit eating this stuff.
No, it's not.
Like you talk to people who quit alcohol. I quit alcohol and cigarettes.
You can't quit food.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's one thing to stop drinking or stop smoking. Again, done it. But Wheat Thins, Oreos, that's way harder.
Oh, totally.
Why?
They're biologically addictive. I know you've had Michael Moss on the show.
Yeah.
And I wrote a book called The 10-Day Detox Diet about the biology of how this affects us. And even if we don't know what we're eating, in other words, there was a study that looked at overweight guys. They gave them 2 different kind of milkshakes on separate days. One milkshake, and they were identical. Same protein, fat, carbs, fiber, everything was the same, except the kind of carbohydrate in one of the drinks was a rapidly absorbed carbohydrate like sugar.
Yes.
And the other one was very slow, didn't cause a spike in sugar. They found that the group who had the high spiking sugar milkshake, they obviously had more adrenaline in their body, more cortisol, the stress hormone. They had more blood sugar elevations, insulin, cholesterol, all that went up. But and they were hungrier. But was more important, they did brain imaging. And they found that the addiction center, the same center that's lit up by cocaine or heroin or cigarettes or whatever, is lit up by sugar.
So and that's very obvious, I think.
Well, yeah, nobody's going to binge on a bag of avocados, but you can go through a bag of Oreos like...
Well, that's totally right. In fact, you can't.
No, you can't.
It's self-limiting.
Right.
You try to binge on avocados and your body says, you know what, I've kind of had enough avocados and we're fine now.
That's right, because there's no nutrition in the other food.
So when you think about that too, something Rob Wolf talks a lot about that I've really appreciated is the palatability and reward cycle. So when you think about this, and almonds are a good example, right? So something that you think is healthy, like you take almonds, like raw almonds, just plain almonds. They use too much water and that kind of thing, but like we'll just put that aside for this brief example here. Raw almonds are pretty filling. You can't eat, like you can eat a bunch of them, but like it's a little tougher to get through like a bunch of raw almonds. Now you roast those almonds, it's a little easier to eat more of them. Same nutrient density for the most part, but you can get through a lot more of them. Now you add salt to that and you can eat a lot more. There's a palatability and reward. The more palatable something is, the reward centers in your brain go off and it says more and more and more. Now take the same thing to potato chips, right? If I were to slice up plain potatoes, and just no salt, no nothing, just plain potatoes, how many of those could you eat, right? Okay, now you fry those things, they're more palatable, right? You can eat more. Now you salt them, you can eat more. And that's how you can smash a bag of potato chips, because that palatability and reward cycle in your brain has confirmed itself and continues to go. So if you can think about that when you're feeding yourself or your children, your family, whatever, filling foods that don't have like a crazy high palatability, right? If there's not that reward center isn't firing, you will get these signals because the signals that say you're full aren't clouded by the reward centers in your brain going off. If anybody out there has done cocaine, right? And I know some of you have, I know I have. What's one thing that cocaine makes you want more? Cocaine, right? That's the same system in your brain that is responding to sugar. Everybody knows that. A little bit of cocaine, a little bit, and then all of a sudden, and then it's 4:00 in the morning and everybody's talking and nobody's listening, right? So you're clouding out that part of your brain, your prefrontal cortex. It's like chill is completely overridden by the reward center, that dopamine center in your brain. And that signal saying, hey, that's enough food, is clouded and overrun by the louder signal saying more, because you're hijacking your own neurology.
So our body is designed to look for nutrition, to hunt for things. Animals do this. They eat and forage on many different plants if they're left in the wild because they know they need to get this vitamin from this one and this thing from that one. I mean, they're not obviously thinking, I need to get my vitamins.
They're driven by instinct.
Yeah, and so we should be the same way. But we've removed ourselves from our food in such a way that we've decoupled our normal biological constraints on overeating. And we actually now are eating way too much food. One study looked at ultra-processed food consumption versus regular, real food. And when people were allowed to eat whatever they wanted in a controlled environment, the people who were given ultra-processed food ate 500 calories more a day.
Oh, yeah.
And you add that up over a year, that's 52 pounds of weight gain with those excess calories, just from eating ultra-processed food. So you have to think of it as a drug. I think of sugar as a recreational drug. Do I eat sugar? Absolutely. But do I take it as a regular part of my diet? No. And I think if you understand that it's a dangerous substance and there's no real, safe level, then you can actually start to organize your life so you can change the way you're eating, create your health, and then you're not going to crave it. You're not going to want it. You're not going to be hungry for it all the time.
What's the key to making the break with your current diet?
It's a great question. I think it's, motivation. People need to understand that they have a problem that's not their fault. And I think a lot of the narrative out there from the food industry, the government, professional associations, Academy of Nutrition Dietetics, American Heart Association, Diabetes Association, is that basically all you have to do to lose weight is eat less and exercise more. And the implicit message in that is that it's your fault you're fat. If you don't eat less and exercise more, it means you're a lazy glutton. And the science just does not support that fact. As per that recent study that I just mentioned, where if you eat the wrong foods, you eat more. So our biology is being hijacked, our hormones have been hijacked, our brain chemistry has been hijacked by the food industry in such a way to drive our behavior. Now, was that intentional? Probably not. But it was a side effect of the drive after World War II to create an abundance of calories and food for a hungry, starving world. And the way they did that was industrialization of agriculture, was large monocrops of corn and soy and wheat. And that led to this cheap, abundant source of raw materials from the food industry to make all kinds of stuff. So and as soon as we kind of entered into that processed food cycle, we've seen obesity spike. Now, when I was born, obesity was 3.4%. Now it's 42%. That's 12-fold increase in my lifetime. When I went to medical school, there was not a single state that had an obesity rate over 20%. Now there isn't a state that has an obesity rate under 20%, and most have 40%. So that's not genetic. And what's happening now in the dialogue around obesity is that, it's genetic. We need these drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy and all.
Yeah, so then they get into Ozempic, which is really good. But yeah, so when we look at this and think about this, there's a lot we can do. And I like what he says there, right? So if we think, we've reframed this and how we language it, right? There is a big personal responsibility component. And I don't want to undermine the personal responsibility stands out there, right? I know that's a really fun thing to say on social media. It's a really, conservatives love this. But you think about this, like say a kid who is 10 years old is given cocaine, right? Or heroin or something like that, right? Periodically on a regular basis. And then that person becomes an addict. Is it that kid's fault that became an addict? No. I would think most people would say no. Can they do something about it? Yeah. Do they need to take responsibility for that addiction and do the best they can? Do they make it that far? Yeah, of course. They need good information to do so? Of course. Do they need support to do so? Yeah. Now, if we think of sugar as a drug and apply the same principles there, we need to say it's not your fault necessarily, but it is your responsibility. And there's a difference between fault and responsibility. And if we take that culturally and try to apply that again in our own lives with our friends, our families, etc., our communities, and try and lead by example there. And I'll say things around my family that are, counter to what they want to believe, but that are true around this kind of stuff. And it challenges people for sure. And it can cause some debates / arguments / hurt some feelings. But I'd rather just lead by example, right? Like, hey, it's okay at Easter for me to say, my daughter's not taking home a bunch of candy. Like, she can have a piece, maybe she can have a Reese's or whatever, but we're not bringing this shit home with us. So if you want to give it to your kids, like, cool, I'm probably just going to throw it in the trash, or we can just do something else. We can try something else. These are all things that we can do. And I will be perceived as a dick, maybe, but maybe a couple people in my family would be like, yeah, you know what? It causes a little friction, but it's probably worth doing. And that's the principles that I live by, like I said, but we have to take responsibility for that in our own lives too, and share that as we can with the people that we can impact, and really get curious about the difference between fault and responsibility.